I'm back in Oakland Unified School Districts as a restorative justice coordinator, and kids are constantly, they're getting in fights, they're jumping each other. And 90% of the time they'll come to the table, right? We'll do one-on-one prep work first always. And then when we come to the table and have conversation for a mediation or for a restorative dialogue, when we start to unpack the layers and talk about, well, what happened? How are you really feeling? Like, what is it that you're trying to protect maybe, right? Or what was it that you're feeling defensive about or angry about? It's never what they think it is. It's usually about something totally different. They just haven't had a chance to process and come back to what it was that was really bothering them. And so when they have that space, they realize, oh, okay, it was actually about this thing. And when they feel seen in that and they're witnessed in that, and they feel like they're actually held in their vulnerabilities, they're able to have more empathy for the other person. It builds their capacity to be able to engage. And then all of a sudden, it strengthens the relationship. Right? Like two people who you think would never be in conversation or be able to get along again, all of a sudden the next day they'll be best friends because they share this really intimate experience of being able to be vulnerable and realizing there are actually much more complex dynamics playing out than they even knew.
Welcome to Purposeful Empathy, a show that's dedicated to amplifying the voices of people from across the globe who understand that the world needs more empathy and are doing something about it. This season is devoted to the power of empathy in education. Meet 12 visionary leaders from the Transformative Educational Leadership Fellowship Program and learn how they are bringing meaningful change to their schools. You won't want to miss a single episode, so hit the subscribe button now. Thanks for watching. Enjoy the show. Welcome to a new episode of Purposeful Empathy. Today I'm joined by Sima Savdharia. She's a trilingual English, Spanish, and Gujarati speaker, a community mediator, a healing justice practitioner, and a nonviolence trainer in the tradition of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. A graduate of the University of San Francisco's Urban Education and Social Justice Master's Program and the East Bay Meditation Center's Practice in Transformative Action Program, Sima integrates trauma-informed healing with problem-posing pedagogy and somatic practices. Their facilitation and training focus on equipping individuals and organizations with community engagement tools for conflict de-escalation and harm prevention. Sima's commitment to justice extends beyond mediation. They've also supported migrant advocacy efforts along the U.S.-Mexico border, working to uplift and empower vulnerable communities. Through all of their work, Sima is deeply committed to Dr. King's vision of a beloved community. This season, I'm exploring the power of empathy in education, and I've invited Sima to be a guest because that's precisely what they practice and exemplify. Welcome to the show, Sima.
Hi, I'm so happy to be here.
I'm thrilled to have you, really thrilled to have you. We know each other through this very interesting fellowship, which is really, I guess, what binds us all together is a vision of wanting to heal and repair the world and find ourselves in beloved communities. So I'm excited to spend this hour with you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
And you sound like you have a really fascinating background with doing really important work, like essential work for the world at the moment. And I find it super interesting, besides the bio that obviously is very impressive. If you might want to, I don't know, offer a few moments in your life, maybe some pivots, maybe some nuances, maybe some extra color to who you are that would explain why you're so passionate about the work you do.
Yeah, I mean, I feel really grateful. The work that I do is very much a calling, and I've kind of been led on this path by previous life experiences. I feel like, I've been very privileged and very blessed in some kind of unique ways. I got to study. I mean, I think a big part of it is studying abroad at a really young age. When I was 16, I lived in a very, predominantly white suburban neighborhood. And I made a radical decision to move to Honduras when I was 16 as part of a study abroad program. And that was an extremely eye-opening experience because I, got privy to a lot of the gang violence and poverty that was there and culture shock. But also just learned a lot about, systemic oppressions and how we move in the world and different marginalized identities. And one thing that really struck me is how much culture is a part of every single conflict. no matter the context. There's always some values cultural conflict happening there. So it really put me on a journey to just engage with social justice and be an advocate, and to kind of deepen my understanding of how I can be in service and solidarity. And that kind of took me on my journey through academia, and all the kind of work I've done in community ever since has been really informed by that experience. And, every experience I've had has led me to the next experience in really powerful, beautiful ways. And I've just been really grateful to be able to glean a lot of insight from the people around me that I've kind of met on my path.
I'm curious to hear, you've used the word social justice, and I feel like that's been totally maligned and reappropriated in undignified ways. Same thing with the word woke, right? So I wonder, if you could be like a social justice whisperer, like why do you think this work really matters? And what do you think people are missing when they get caught up by these like weird tropes around what those words mean?
Yeah, that is such a great question. I think even in a lot of, social justice movement spaces, it could be and feel very divisive. And there's a lot of so much rhetoric, right? Around like, what are we even talking about? Sometimes it's like, wait, where are we? Could be really disorienting. And again, going back to Dr. King's vision of a beloved community, I think it really is about values alignment, political alignment, values alignment, coming back to a sense of purpose and internal solidarity as well as external solidarity and community, right? Like thinking about how are we taking care of ourselves in right relationship with one another first and foremost. And so that's been, yeah, for me, it's a personal practice. That's something I try to come back to. And also just having empathy and awareness for the fact that people assign meaning in different ways at different times, and trying to meet people there, I think has been really helpful in my journey as well.
And so I want to unpack two other terms, right relationship. I think it's such a powerful frame, and tell us what beloved community is. So let's maybe start way meta, okay? What is your understanding of what a beloved community is?
That is such a great question. I mean, beloved community, so it's a space, it's a utopian, right, idyllic space. It's a North Star. It might not be there yet, but it is a vision where everybody is interconnected. Everybody has a sense of community. I think at the core, that's really what it's about. Everybody feels connected. Everybody has purpose. Everybody is in community and also feels that sense of community and connection and belonging. I mean, so much of this work is really just about belonging. People want to feel like they belong and are validated. And there's so many things that kind of get in our ways, institutional programming, otherwise, but beloved community is a space where all of that aside, we can really come back to basics, and we're able to just be in a shared space in the most kind of authentic, raw, sincere way.
And that's how we can be in right relationship with one another.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the right, all works out hopefully. And I think right relationship, a lot of times, people could be, there's an emphasis on wanting to be right. There's that power struggle. There's always power struggle in every relationship, in every dynamic tension and conflict. And so a lot of my work, I'm reminding folks, we could be right or we could be in right relationship. And it's about figuring out how do we grapple with the dynamic tensions and engage people in discourse and invite them into dialogue.
Hmm.
I think that's the key part that a lot of times gets missed.
And we're going to unpack sort of the importance of dialogue and communication in the work that you do for sure. I just am curious to know, do you think your work is at the intersection of small p politics and spirituality? Because I find that empathy sort of is at that nexus, and I think that when you care about others without projecting onto them and you're really holding space for them, it is both a spiritual act and a highly political act, because it doesn't accept any kind of power asymmetry. It's just holding space for another human being. So I just wonder if you have the same ideas about your work.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this work is spiritual, is intrinsically spiritual. And, there's false dichotomy between like the spiritual and the political, and they're absolutely one and the same, right? And I think that's the bridging work that we're doing as we're trying to cultivate beloved community, is just reminding folks to come back to that sense of spirit, sense of belonging, sense of spirit, definitely one and the same for sure. There
Mm.
has to be some higher calling, right? Whatever that is for each individual. What is it that we're working towards? Like what is our vision? What is it that we're hoping to move towards?
So what's the mission and what do you hope to do? You're educating people to what?
Yeah, I mean, I think essentially being in right relationship with one another, right? And so unpacking conflict, figuring out how do we get out of our own ways. And that's on the personal, right? The spiritual level. And then also the interpersonal, practicing effective communication skills, and the systemic, thinking about how can we challenge these kind of oppressive institutions and structures that we're in, recognizing that they're all playing out, all these dynamics are playing out all the time. The personal is very much political. We can't separate those two, and they're not mutually exclusive, right? And so really figuring out how do we kind of lay this all out, really define conflict in a way that's generative so that we can continue to come back to those intersections. We can continue to move in healthier ways and lean into our interdependence.
I love the idea that conflict can be generative. Okay, so what do you think we need to know about conflict? And what do you think we misunderstand about conflict?
I mean, I think that's a huge one, right? Conflict is generative. I think a lot of times we live in a conflict averse culture. There could be a lot of fear around conflict. It's uncomfortable, it's vulnerable. And the thing that I always share, right, is conflict is neutral. It's inevitable. It's a part of everything we do. It's not like conflict is positive or negative. It's very much kind of a neutral element. It's about our responses to conflict. And that's the piece about dialogue and about values alignment, how we show up, how do we demonstrate and live into our values. And so, we could get angry, we could get aggressive, we could shut down. People have different trauma responses to conflict. And the other thing is there's no right or wrong way to respond, right? I think people are human and people respond in very different ways based on their own lived experiences. Again, that's a key piece about empathy, meeting people where they're at and just recognizing that given a diversity of either trauma responses, communication styles, whatever it is, people show up in different ways. And there's ways that we can continue to meet each other where we're at and move through. It's going to continue the dialogue and continue just the healthy generative conflict that continues to allow for more creative potential.
So if I put you on the spot and imagine or ask you to think of a time when you witnessed generative conflict and what unfolded, do you have anything that comes to mind? Like, can you give us an example?
I mean, all the time, I think about my students, right? Right now, I'm back in Oakland Unified School Districts as a restorative justice coordinator, and kids are constantly, they're getting in fights, they're jumping each other. And 90% of the time, they'll come to the table, right? We'll do one-on-one prep work first, always. And then when we come to the table and have conversation for mediation and for a restorative dialogue, when we start to unpack the layers and talk about, well, what happened? How are you really feeling? Like, what is it that you're trying to protect, maybe, right? Or what was it that you're feeling defensive about or angry about? It's never what they think it is. It's usually about something totally different. They just haven't had a chance to process and come back to what it was that was really bothering them. And so when they have that space, they realize, oh, okay, it was actually about this thing. And when they feel seen in that and they're witnessed in that, and they feel like they're actually held in their vulnerabilities, they're able to have more empathy for the other person. It builds their capacity to be able to engage. And then all of a sudden it strengthens the relationship, right? Like two people who you think would never be in conversation or be able to get along again, all of a sudden the next day they'll be best friends because they share this really intimate experience of being able to be vulnerable and realizing there are actually much more complex dynamics playing out than they even knew.
Yeah, which is why like self-awareness is such a crucial skill to develop, right? And just to have the somatic awareness of that our body is reacting, feeling triggered. Those are like signals that something is happening. And I'm in the process right now. I think I've done 3 sessions with a IFS therapist. It's new therapy for me, internal family systems, and it has to do with the fact that we have like a unified self, but then there's a lot of parts to us. And as we go through life, our emotions are triggered in response to the various parts that have needs or, is feeling triggered based on memories or traumas or, things going on. And it's remarkable to me doing this therapy, how complex we are and how little attention we give to our complexities.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So some of the work you're doing is just to actually shine a light on like what's happening is multi-dimensional and historical and maybe intergenerational.
Yeah, thank you for naming that. Yeah, the historical piece, that's another thing, right? Like conflict has history. People forget there's so much generational stuff that we bring with us, even on a like purely molecular level internally. I mean, there's so much that's stored in our bodies and our hearts and our minds, and it comes out in different ways. People represent their culture in different ways, and it's all there, it's all present. I mean, there's always that connection for sure.
Have you witnessed then, I'm sure over probably on a regular basis, but maybe you could speak to what it's like to bear witness to a conflict that does get a little bit porous, and we can start to see some complexities and some historical stuff. And then people are starting to listen, not to respond and react, but listen to understand and hold space for one another. Like you must see openings and bridges being built and a sense of maybe even mutual understanding and respect show up.
Yeah, I mean, you just made me think of a group of students we're working with right now, sixth to eighth grade. It's a middle school that I'm at currently, and we're doing solidarity circles once a month. And so it's not necessarily, it was initially prompted by a particular conflict where two students got in a physical fight at school. But from that, we've just been sitting in circle with a select group of students once a month. And we're having conversations around race and culture and history. And these are newcomer Latina students and also, you know, some of our Black youth as well. And there's so many just cultural misunderstandings. And I think one of the kids just made such a poignant remark. He's like, well, how are we supposed to be friends if we don't even speak the same language?
Mm.
Literally don't speak the same language, right? And so we've been working with a translator, but we've been having lots of conversations around, you know, have you ever had an adult? When, if ever, have you had an adult to help you to process and talk about racial differences? This specifically is one example. And then also, how has race and culture impacted your self-care practices? Like, how does that, you know, shape the ways that you show up in the world and engage with other people? And they were asking such brilliant questions on their own. And they're like, well, could we say this word? Could we not say this word? What does this mean in this context? You know, if I say this, what does that mean to you? If I'm loud or if I'm quiet, eye contact, all these subtle cultural cues and nuances that they just didn't know about, right? Until they sat down in circle and were really hearing each other's stories. And then they start to realize they're like, oh, wow, like you have that kind of violence in your neighborhood too, or you've experienced this, or you have this relationship with your family. Wow, me too. You know, you know, whatever it is, are you like this artist? Me too. And so there's actually it became a much more fluid conversation as we were sitting in circle. And every month they go deeper and deeper. And you could just physically feel in the room, like in a really palpable sense, the relationship starting to deepen. And there's something that just feel like there's a sense of ease that comes with that space and just being able to process some of this together. That's been so beautiful to witness. And just, yeah, the sense of empathy, solidarity, right? It's most basic level. And this is middle school.
Mm.
And they just like, they've taken it on as their own. Like they're co-facilitating now. They've kind of taken ownership of the space and these circles. And it's been such a gift to just see them like really adopt it and kind of take it on.
So for those who just don't get it or haven't experienced it, the cynics out there about all this social emotional learning opportunities, like what would you say? Why does it matter?
I mean, sit in circle with us, right? Like, that's it's always like I try to lead with an invitation. It is very much an experiential practice. And I think it's easy, right? It's easy in today's political climate to feel cynical. There's a lot at play, a lot of different moving pieces. And it's again, the sense coming back to like the sensory experience of being able to be in a safe space, physically feeling a sense of safety. That's not something that you could, I mean, we could write about it, we could talk about it, right? But to actually feel it and experience it is a very different thing. And especially with youth, I think a lot of times youth are so perceptive and we don't give them enough credit and just how self-aware they really are because they're constantly reading the room, they're picking up our cues as adults. And so being able to see them kind of lean into that, their own kind of sensory experience is really powerful as well.
Mm.
They
How
need
have,
it.
sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I was just gonna say, I mean, they need that. I think they're really like hungry for adults who are able to kind of meet them there and demonstrate that level of vulnerability and self-awareness as well.
So, Sima, your work obviously is with young people in schools. I can understand your applications in a lot of different contexts. Do you do also like work with corporate types, like with companies?
We do, yeah. I mean, we've worked with different city agencies and also, different corporations and large organizations who a lot of times will have systems and procedures in place and just are lacking kind of the communications piece of effective communication. And so we'll talk a lot about, right, going back to basics. And it's like, well, why isn't this working? We have all these systems and processes in place, but if the relationships aren't there, we're not going to get very far because we are humans at the end of the day. And so that's where circle process and the mediation trainings can be really supportive. And it's interesting because it's not like one or the other, right? There's some balance between system skills and relationships. And so a lot of times we'll kind of go in and do an organizational analysis and figure out, okay, what pieces do you need to strengthen? Because it might be that there are strong relationships in place and maybe they're missing some of the more procedural pieces and the operations pieces. But I think really figuring out like the intersections again, like how do those pieces all play together can be really supportive and just creating more generative conversations.
And I imagine that some companies might, or some leaders within the companies might say, okay, well, we've reached the end of the rope and now we should do this kind of mediation type and let's check a box and like, enough already. We've met all your needs. Whereas other, I imagine leaders and companies are like, we don't have the tools, but other people might be able to steward us through a process with some tools. And that must be really exciting because it doesn't matter anymore the context because you're doing the good work of mediation to help people understand what the needs are, what the complexities are, like you've described before.
Yeah. And a lot of times, it's interesting because when we do, so we'll do restorative justice trainings, mediation trainings, but we'll also do a lot of conflict coaching. So when people will call us in for support with organizational development work, a lot of times we will spend a good amount of time of just kind of coaching leadership and kind of walking them through, how are you engaging with your staff? Like, what are your self-care practices? How are you showing up? What are some ways that we can, what are some of the pieces that we want to hone in on? And sometimes it's a mixed bag. You never know kind of what you're going to get, but I think that's a big tell, kind of coaching leadership and starting there and having conversations around shared leadership and how people are delegating or not, right? And like, what does it look like to actually demonstrate shared leadership in practice can be a really different thing than what people think it might be.
And I'll just use this opportunity. The last series of the podcast was devoted to the Inner Development Goals framework. And, throughout everything you've described in your work, it reminds me that if we're going to have a new generation of leaders that have the kind of skills that are required for this moment in humanity, humility, communication, self-awareness, presence, all of those things are embedded in the work that you do. And so, I've come to the conclusion that for those who think all of this is just the woo-woo soft skill stuff that doesn't really matter to the bottom line, I just don't, I can't tolerate that. I just disagree with that. And I want to help them shine a light on how much can be improved for everyone if they're, open their aperture to a new set of skills.
Yeah, and we're multi-partial, right? Like everybody has their own biases, and so I think it's really this work is about just holding complexity and being able to unpack nuance and hold complexity. And so recognizing that everybody's going to be bringing their own kind of approaches and have their own orientations to the work, and that's okay, right? But being able to know where are we at, how are we defining conflict, what are our values, so that we can continue to keep finding those intersections and keep figuring out, okay, where are we meeting each other, where are we beating each other? And I think of this word respect, right? It was, what's that Nora Hurston quote, research has formalized curiosity. So I think, right, just coming from a place of curiosity as much as possible and respecting the people in front of us. So really respect, like look again, look again, look again, look again, and just being in that practice of continuing to love people into fullness in every moment.
Oh, love that. We'll make sure to have information about how to get in touch with you in our show notes. I'm curious to know how the formal work and training that you have in this space has actually impacted you as a person and how you go about living your life in relationships with others. Like, do you have any stories that come to mind about how you have managed conflict differently or?
Yeah, it's kind of a funny story. I mean, one growth edge for me, I'll say, when I first started my business and kind of deepening my practice, I think that um, I think there are a lot of expectations for how I would show up in community with certain friends or certain colleagues. And, I had to really take off the expert hat and remind myself that, oh, just because I do this work as a mediator does not mean that I am perfect and not in conflict. That's not a realistic expectation for any human. Right. And so I really had to like early on grapple with that. And I mean, it was such a gift because it reminded me that it really is about cultural humility. And that extends to me as well as somebody who's in community, that interdependence piece. And so it's been kind of my guiding light, just as a reminder to keep coming back to center and having more grace for myself as well. So I can extend that to other people and do this work, right? And continue to come back to basics, teach people about sort of different elements for effective communication and being in right relationship and being able to hold space. And with that, it's been building my own capacity to be able to hold space, to be able to be vulnerable with myself. You could only take people as far as you're willing to go. And it's
Mm,
really pushed me. This work has really pushed me to do some of that deep diving, to do some of that self exploration in ways that I wasn't even expecting. And it's honestly been the biggest gift because it's really contributed to a lot of my own healing.
mm. You mentioned earlier in Circle that the kids are talking, you prompted them to think about their self-care practices. I would love to know what your self-care practices are.
Oh, I mean, now, I feel grateful of being able to hold space and circle. There's like some reciprocity that happens there. So that does also fill my cup and is really nourishing. But outside of that, working with youth brings me a lot of joy. I'm a big animal person. I'm all about animal therapy these days. I'm a little emotional support companion with me today. And just, meditation has been a big one. Every year, at least, I try to do a 10-day silent meditation retreat just to reset. Exercise is huge. The embodiment practices, running, yoga, boxing, um, anything to come back to the body. That's a big one. And water, drinking enough water.
Tell me
You
more
know,
about that.
just the base. I mean, the healthy meal prep, drinking enough water, the basic things that we forget about. What's that meme that was going around social media? Like, don't forget you're actually just a house plant. We need sunlight, we need water, we need rest, yeah, all these things.
Sleep,
Sleep.
sleep, yeah, sleep, and stay away from the phones, which is why you're not on social media, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's a big one. Yeah.
And you made that decision as of when? Like, if and could you
Oh
tell me the
gosh.
story around that?
Yeah. I mean, I think it very much is connected to a self-care practice. It was at least 5 years ago, I started to get off social media more and more, and I've mostly completely disengaged now. But just in terms of like the mass input and just like how much media there was, I couldn't integrate it as quickly as my body needed to. And taking a social media break, realizing how healthy that was, getting back into a more regulated routine with eating and sleeping, actually feeling that in myself and noticing how I was showing up in community with that self-awareness, it just makes me not want to engage in the same ways anymore. And it's been so healthy to not engage, because when I am present with people who are directly in front of me, I'm actually present with people who are in front of me. And that gift of presence, that embodiment, it's been so healthy for me. And hopefully, right, it's also cultivating more of that interdependence because there's healthier relationship building happening.
So at a systems level, you must feel like society has lost the plot a bit in terms of, even having the chance to self-regulate because we're always kind of wired and our amygdala's firing or our limbic system, like all of it. Like it's a perfect storm for us not to engage in a way that allows right relationship to show up, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think it can be like, I think there are uses for it, and there's so many distractions. And to your point, I mean, I think it just in terms of how stimulating it could be for the nervous system, I don't even think there's awareness around like how impactful it is on a psychological, physical level.
So walk me through some of your workshops. Like what are some of the activities that we do besides the circle? And maybe we could even start with that because we spoke of the circle, but for somebody who's like, what's the circle? I mean, I know what a circle is and we're sitting around in a circle, but like, can you kind of take it a step by step through the process and maybe some other activities that you are go-to for this kind of work?
Yeah, so in a restorative justice, so I'll do restorative justice trainings as well as mediation trainings and organizational development trainings. And so for the restorative justice piece, we're sitting in like circle formats. We're physically in a circle. And then we always have the centerpiece, and that's symbolic of our interdependence. And so we'll have represented symbolically somehow the four elements. And so we'll talk a little bit about the healing lineage, how restorative justice is really an indigenous practice that's been, practiced by our ancestors forever. And it's now used, within the criminal legal context as a way to facilitate more healing, to actually not just be punitive, but to invite folks into healing. So we'll have the fire. A lot of times there'll be a candle. We'll have a plant. We'll have the water. We'll have some fire, water, earth, air. So the air, right, the stillness to remind us to focus, the water to kind of be fluid, to cleanse. If there's something we need to burn through, we could do that as well. We talk about the elements and how it's present in every culture. So there's that universal element to it. And then the thing about the circle format itself as well is that it generates a more sort of egalitarian flow, which is huge, right? So we'll use a talking piece. So a lot of times people will pick a talking piece of their choice from the centerpiece, and the person who's talking, we always say they're the sacred one. So it's a way to really focus our attention and really kind of hold space in a more intentional way. And when people feel that vulnerability and when they're witnessed, there's nothing between us. It's so rare that, we meet and just sit with people, nothing between us, no tables, no laptops, no phones, no desks, no papers. It's just community and space. And it's a really vulnerable position to be in. And so when people do have that talking piece and they're sharing, they're always welcome to pass. But if they want to share, right, people tend to be able to open up because they feel that loving presence. And so there's a lot that is generated in that space and encourages other people to share vulnerably as well. And so we'll have community agreements as well to facilitate safety. And we'll talk about, what is said and stays in the room. People aren't sharing other people's experiences without their consent. But a lot of times it's like when we go around the circle, every discussion round, people share more and more deeply and get more and more vulnerable. And there is something in that, right? When you invite in the collective genius in that way, that is transformed. And people feel it, it's in the room, right? People might call it different things. People have different ideas for what that experience might be for them. But there is something that can be really sacred and healing about that. And we remind people, you get what you give. If you're participating, if you're vulnerable, if you're focused, if you're in it and you're paying attention, you're going to get what you need. And that might be different from the person sitting to the left of you and the right of you. But there is something that you're going to get from that space that people take with them. And so again, it's experiential. A lot of times we'll kind of go over the basics of the elements of circle and the ceremony, and then people will see it and they'll feel it. And so there's, that's sort of like our restorative justice 101. And then we'll talk about also the difference between a conflict circle and a harm circle. And so sometimes that might even look like longer term accountability processes where it's a series of circles and kind of more one-on-one prep work that's involved for people to get to a point where they're able to even just physically be in shared space with somebody, for example, it might have caused them harm, physical harm, sexual harm, whatever it might be. But the practice itself is always the same, and kind of the basic elements of circle are always there.
In the one-on-ones, is it mostly dialogue, the prep work, or are there also some somatic exercises, or how do you help somebody get to the next stage?
Both, yeah. So that's actually a really great question because a lot of times people will think that um, de-escalation and self-regulation are two different things. I just want to start by saying that. So a lot of times we'll start with some sort of grounding activity. Even when we open up circle, right? We'll always have some sort of grounding. So we'll do a short meditation. It might be a walking exercise, some sort of stretch or movement activity, just to actually calm the nervous system. So that's step number one, to actually just self-regulate, to be in a space where we can de-escalate. A lot of times we'll be eager when we're in fight or flight or whatever it is. We're eager to kind of jump into the conversation. And we haven't taken that moment, that sacred pause to really just lean into, okay, what is it that even wants to come up right now? And so we'll invite in that kind of moment of clarity to kind of set the stage, to do that clearing, right? And that might look different in different practices and different lineages, but there's always that sort of element to it to kind of calm the nervous system, bring it down. And then checking in with folks around, what were you thinking and feeling? What's been the hardest part? What is it that you're really valuing? What is it that you need right now? So we're always using a needs-based analysis. And when people take that moment to really pause and do the values clarification, things get clarified. And you might come to circle thinking, oh, I wanted to talk about this thing, and then realize, oh, actually, I was really hurt because, this triggered a previous experience or memory that I had around this. Could we talk about that? Mm. And so it takes shape. We'll kind of do the dance and it takes shape as we move along, because whatever needs to be unearthed is going to be unearthed and is going to get clarified in a safe way.
Thank goodness we're learning more about the internal systems and how our fascia, for example, and our microbiome has, an important role to play in how we interpret things and how we feel about the world. I feel like we're just at the tip of the iceberg in terms of understanding the internal mechanisms and how, if we understand that we're operating not as thinking beings, but as feeling beings. I remember when I was writing the book, I learned that they had to make a decision between calling our species Homo sapiens or Homo sentiens. And they went with Homo sapiens, which is the thinking man. But we're so much more of a feeling. And it's just, the Enlightenment Cartesian thinking, no, we're not animals. And we're not. We're living creatures, but so complicated. Yeah.
Spiritual beings having a human experience.
There you go. Yeah, 100%, 100%. So, what do you think are the top things that people could do to respond to conflict using a nonviolent approach? And maybe explain what a nonviolent approach is first.
Yeah, one thing I want to speak about is kind of misconception about nonviolence being a passive force. Sometimes people think of nonviolence as what's referred to in the Kingian framework as negative peace, and so peace without justice. So it doesn't mean that, we're staying quiet about injustices or not addressing conflict. It's very much an active practice. And that was Dr. King's whole philosophy on militant nonviolence, right? Like making sure that people have the opportunity to express themselves in service to justice, for peace, for beloved community. And that could feel scary for some people, right? Depending on our cultural upbringing, if we are more conflict averse, whatever it is. But there's ways that we could engage and work towards peace and nonviolence that feel comfortable enough for us, or also stretching us, and ultimately are going to be sustainable. I think that's a fear people, right, forget, or maybe sometimes don't have enough lived experience to remember that conflict actually strengthens relationships when it's addressed in a way that is that's thoughtful and intentional. And so a couple of things, right? Like people will ask, worked with all sorts of individuals, organizations, school, city agencies, and across the board, people have the same values. People want the same thing on a human level. People want the same things. They're like, well, how can we communicate, get along better? How can we be at peace with one another? Like, what do we do? And there isn't any like fancy a cookie cutter recipe. This is your like go-to guide, right? Because the complexity of the human experience. But I think some of the things we spoke about already is just really, really important. That sacred pause, that grounding piece for sure. Because a lot of times we'll jump to solutions before we take that moment to really dig underneath the iceberg around, okay, what are the values? What is that driving force? Like, what am I really wanting and needing in this moment? So taking that time, and then also just, checking for understanding. It's a lot of confirmation bias, a lot of assumptions that get made about individuals and cultures. And so really thinking about, because message delivered is not message received, right? And so really checking in with folks without shame or blame, but just genuinely, I heard you say this. Is this what you meant? Just that simple reframe could go a really long way. Using that needs-based analysis and focusing on repair, right? And so really, again, going back to this thing around could be right, or you could be in right relationship. And what is our ultimate vision? Do we want beloved community? Right? A lot of times when we're in circle, I ask people, do we want beloved community? Okay, yes. Really, do we want to be in community? Yes. Really, really, do we want to be in community? Okay, yes. So we'll continue to kind of unpack that with each round. And just, being able to hold space also for people's vulnerabilities, like recognizing that we can't hold people accountable, but we could hold them into fullness by bearing witness to their vulnerability. In that space of empathy is when people will soften and be able to find those intersections and to be able to connect in a way that might not have previously even been on our radars.
So I imagine you come across folks that are not ready to do that work. There's a resistance, and even if they've experienced it once and seen the upsides, they might still not want to be vulnerable for all sorts of reasons. So how do you work with somebody who is digging in their heels and just not surrendering to a healing journey or a process that you're describing?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. So one piece of it is that, there needs to be a recognition and appreciation that reconciliation happens on its own timeline. Like, this is an Indigenous practice. We're working on capitalist clock, but it's really an Indigenous practice. And we're in ancient time. And people, like, it's cyclical. It's not linear. It's not, sometimes it's almost the opposite, where people are like, okay, I just want to do this thing and get it over with. And it's like, well, no, but hold on, let's stay here for a minute. Right. And so really going back to this piece around self-awareness and checking in with folks, again, using a needs-based analysis around, we'll ask them, well, what is it that you want from this process? What is it that is your end goal? What are you going to be able to get from this? Not in a transactional sense, but in a sense of, what's going to help you to feel more connected to the process itself. And I always tell people, right, like, I'm not coming in as a consultant to reconcile anything, to solve any problems. Like, that's not what I'm here for. It's not about absolving individuals of accountability, but it's really about holding the space for them to be able to lean into their own stories and to take ownership in whatever ways that they need to. And so at the very least, right, I say that this is an opportunity for you to get more clarity in terms of understanding what's going on for you. Most of the time, people want that. They're like, okay, so this is about me understanding myself better. It's not even about the other person. Okay, yes. And when people are aware of what it is that they contributed to a conflict, they have much more capacity to be able to engage and actually be in some sort of compromise or some sort of dialogue.
What's coming up for me, I don't know why, but it's so interesting. Like, America's a very litigious place, right? There's lawyers, there's lawsuits, all of that. And I'm thinking there's the winners and losers, and who's right in the, based on precedent and all this other kind of orientation. And you're basically saying that's not at all what this is about. There's no right or wrong here. Nobody's to blame. Nobody's the one who's at fault. It's how can we unpack what's going on for both of you to bring more clarity and get a sense of what your values are, what's getting triggered, like all of these questions from a place of non-judgment and curiosity is really illuminating where so many more opportunities exist for compromise and connection than would happen in the sort of frame that I was describing earlier, the legal system, right?
Yeah. And it's so interesting. It's so unfortunate too, because a lot of times when people go through the legal system, even if you're going in, you might have a super righteous stance, your agency is robbed from you. The courts take on a totally different process, not actually advocating on any one individual's behalf. It could feel like a very violating experience. And so this really is about, self-autonomy and like having a sense of ownership over ourselves and our relationships in a different way. And again, that's vulnerable because there's also more responsibility that comes with that. And so, right, reminding people if you're in conflict, it's not like they're right or they're wrong. Like we messed up. There's relational rupture. Crap, we as like a people is okay, we messed up. So how do we reflect on our contributions in service to the relationship, which might mean extending an apology, but also, right, there could be something really nourishing about that to be able to have a sense of personhood and self-awareness in that could feel really affirming as well. There's something that's really could be really grounding.
So what could the system of education learn from the work that you do and the tradition that you're part of?
Oof, I mean, that's an interesting question because I am currently working in a school system. And I think, the biggest thing we just keep coming across in the schools is the time, the pacing that it takes to be able to do the prep work to be in circle is really challenging. We don't often have the opportunity. Sometimes we have to take that moment to really just slow down to be able to let relationships unfold and to just be aware of the unfolding and to really kind of sink into what it is that needs to kind of come forth. There's so much opportunity for connection and growth and education that's lost when we just go from, one thing to the next to the next to the next because we need to hit this mark and that metric or whatever it is. Yeah, I don't know if that answered the question, but that's one thing I would say, just everybody just slow down.
And that's the recurring theme. I'm going to look over to my little whiteboard here where I have a couple of quotes, and this is Bayo Akomolafe, who says, "The times are urgent, let's slow down." Right. I think that's what's coming up. We are conditioned to be in hustle
100%.
orientation for lots of reasons. Everything about the world is competitive and hierarchical, and so there's not an abundance mentality, it's a scarcity mentality, and that sort of kind of moves us and orients us towards like speed as opposed to slowing down and understanding and being in relation. So that's like a big takeaway for me. And I'm thinking about, sometimes I give talks with nurses. So the most recently I've been working with a palliative care center, and these are incredible nurses that are choosing to spend their working careers with people who are dying and knowing they will die in their care and that they will be there to shepherd families along through the process over and over and over again. And so I have so much reverence for that work because that is just by de facto incredibly emotionally taxing. And one of the things I've discovered is that the nurses are very, very hostile to one another. And I hear that from teachers too. Teachers like put it all out in their classroom. They're just like there for their kids, managing, 34 little bodies, but also 34 little spirits, and they want the best for each and every one of them, and their curriculum, hormones, not enough food for breakfast, like all of it, and then the parental stuff. And then they're mean to each other in the teacher's lounge too, because I guess they just, have reached their limit, and that's the safest place that they can let out some of the steam. But I feel like some of this work would be so helpful among people who are kind of coming up at that compassion fatigue on a regular basis professionally.
Yeah, I mean, we're hardest on the people we care about, unfortunately. And the compassion fatigue is real, right? I think, yeah, burnout is real, compassion fatigue is real. And I mean, I think to your point, the sense of competition is real. And so sometimes it doesn't even feel safe to talk about it until we've already crossed our own boundaries. And that's a really dangerous place to get to.
Yes, indeed. It's a very, very dangerous place. I feel like at an individual social collective like level, here we are, 2025, like, hello, we all need to slow down. Oh my gosh.
It's,
So,
yeah.
um, I'm coming down to the end of our conversation, and I've loved this so much. And thank you so much for your time. And I really hope people will check out the resources and links that we'll include in the show notes so that we can learn more about you and the work you do. But maybe, Sima, you'll also send me some resources that you think are useful, whether it's books or websites or videos. I think that could be super helpful. So two questions left. One is, and we've talked about it. You've certainly used the word empathy several times in this conversation, but I wonder what role you believe empathy plays in education. So if you could make that really kind of more explicit, what do you think?
Oh my gosh. I mean, I think that's at the heart of it, right? Like if we're not practicing empathy and human connection, what are we doing? What are we teaching? What are we, right? Who are we trying to educate? Yeah, compassion and grace. Those are my words for 2025, compassion and grace.
Mm.
And, again, I think for me, right, because I can only speak for myself, it's letting go of how I think other people should be showing up or expectations that I have for what should be, and just meditating on acceptance, coming from that place of being able to just be present to what is. So it feels really challenging. And that's where I know I'm able to invite in a deeper sense of empathy. And I've experienced that in other institutions and other educational landscapes. And so I do have a lot of hope that we are doing the work. It's important to also uplift the fact that, there is a lot of care out there. People care. People want to do good. People want to be in community. We want to connect. That is very much a human trait. And I think sometimes, we forget to remember.
Mm. I'm even just thinking for myself, this is on the heels of that weird Oval Office meeting between Zelensky and Trump and everyone, and it just all went sideways fast. I mean, as a conflict mediator, you must have found layers and layers and layers of things there to look at. I'm thinking about how I reacted to that and how my brain torpedoed into all of the geopolitical ramifications. And it's so easy to get super alarmist and just woo, woo, woo. And it's just been really interesting to hear you talk about compassion and grace the way you have, because I think optimism is available to you because you have the practice of slowing down. So you're not feeling woo wound up. So the regular practice for your own system, your own body, is spiritually nourishing to face another day. So it's radical.
Yeah. It is. I mean, it is. That's been my, saving grace for sure. And some days are easier than others, right? And again, that's part of the practice, is just always remembering when I get off track, coming back to center. And, I have a wonderful therapist, shout out to her. She's always reminding me hope is a feeling. We have to remind ourselves to be able to feel the sense of hope, feel a sense of compassion, feel a sense of community belonging. It's there, right? We're already in relationship. It's just a matter of being able to kind of let it in. And so being in that kind of grounded feeling space. Programmed to do, unfortunately. So that's the practice. Yeah, coming back to that.
So I guess the last invitation then would be to invite you to feel a moment or remember a moment when you felt you were on the receiving end of empathy and what that meant for you.
Oh my gosh. When I was thinking about, empathy, I've been thinking about this a lot recently. One of the most profound experiences that stand out to me, hands down, was just doing migrant advocacy work when I was volunteering at a refugee shelter in Tijuana. And speaking of sense of belonging and connection, I mean, that's the deepest sense of connection I've ever felt. Just like instant solidarity, migrants coming from all over the world, because it's a primary point of entry into the US. And so folks from all over the world speaking all sorts of different languages, different experiences, people who've experienced horrific, torture, whatever it is, state oppression, all the things, right? And being in this shared space together, just focused on connection, survival, coming back to like the basic human elements of community, was so profound because there was no room there for ego or judgment or shame or blame. We were in the kitchen every night cooking meals for 300 people, kids, everybody's different kids running around, right? Connecting across different cultures and identity markers. And I've never felt safer in my entire life. We didn't always have, right? Like there was food insecurity sometimes, wasn't sure where people are going to be living, housing insecurity, all the things. And the sense of safety from being in that type of kind of village community environment, something I can never take for granted. It was so, it like makes me actually emotional thinking about it again, because yeah, people just really, really, really want to feel a sense of belonging, I think, at the core.
So it's interesting because I've asked this question probably well over 100 times, probably getting closer to 200 now. And I never know what I'm going to get as an answer. And I believe you're the first person who's talked about what I'm sensing is like this diffused empathy. It's like, collective empathy, where the question is, when were you on the receiving end of empathy, but you felt like a empathy throughout the space that also impacted you. And that's so beautiful.
Yeah.
And you believe that was made possible because
I don't even know. I mean, I don't even know if I can answer that. I think there's just something about, people being just sharing the experience of vulnerability, like true vulnerability. There was humility that came with that, a level of just like surrender and humility, I think, that came with that, where it was just like such a stark realization, like, oh, we really, really need each other. And I think we've known that as a peoples, we've known that for a really long time. But remembering that again and again, and particularly in that political context, was just like, yeah, really, really, really hit home in a really profound way.
and circles back to us being spiritual beings in a human condition,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. I wasn't anticipating that being such a spiritual experience. And it almost feels like, yeah, I don't know. It almost feels like a little bit trite to say that, or it feels like a little bit, I'm trying not to say cheesy because I don't think that's it. But um, yeah, I'm almost embarrassed to say that, but it's so real. Like, I don't know how else to explain it. It was really a profoundly spiritual experience for all those reasons.
I believe that. I so believe that. I wish more of us could experience that and know it in ourselves and in our bodies. We would treat each other so differently.
Yeah. And it's all in time.
Oh, let's leave it on that note. Oh, that is a beautiful way to end this conversation. Thank you so much for spending this hour talking about your work. And I want to thank everybody who's been watching or listening. And we'll see you next week at Purposeful Empathy.
If you know someone who would benefit from this episode, please share it with them. Post the link to your socials and hit the subscribe button now. The world needs more empathy, and you have an important role to play.